everyone. Today we're joined by Taness, Cline, Deputy Director of Family Crisis Resource Center. I'm Dr. Amanda Vanderveer, and today we're talking about partner violence. And when we think about partner or domestic violence, we think of someone being physically violent, someone beating up somebody else. So is that all there is to it?
No, I think that's very normal. I think just as human beings, when we hear the word violence or we hear the word abuse, probably, we have this mental image of what that means, and oftentimes it's the physical abuse and the injuries that stem from that. But with intimate partner violence, there are many layers to the abuse, to the control that takes place in a relationship. And, a few of those other categories, I guess we could say, the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse in relationships. And, we're talking about the name calling and the put downs and the threats and just really chipping away at someone's sense of self, sense of worth. And I can tell you honestly, over the years working with many, many survivors, I hear time and time again that regardless of the physical abuse that they have endured, it oftentimes is the emotional abuse and that verbal abuse that has done the most damage and most lasting damage, because that is something that is very deep, and it's just really difficult to rebuild and to heal that damage. So absolutely, it's things that people don't see. It's much more hidden. It's not visible to friends, to family most times. So there is something to that I think is just very, insidious in the harm that it does to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And bruises heal eventually, but that emotional abuse, we can't necessarily see like a bruise, but it doesn't necessarily heal in the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So why do people become violent in relationships with people that they're supposed to love?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think we have to remember when we're talking about intimate partner violence, we're really talking about a choice. Those behaviors are a choice. Oftentimes we think of it as, you'll hear, well, I was just out of control or some other reason such as that, but it's actually the opposite. It's about that need for power, that need for control, and feeling like one has the right to control everything about the relationship, everything about their partner and what he or she does. And so that's the whole love thing is what makes it really difficult. One of the things that makes it difficult, because you believe this person loves you and you love them. And so wondering, why is this happening in my relationship? And that's where I think we oftentimes get a lot of the self-blame that victims struggle with, is, well, must be something wrong with me, because somebody that loves me wouldn't do this unless there was a reason for that. But I just think it's very important to keep in mind that it is a choice, and it is not, it's a learned behavior. It's not something someone is born with as genes, so therefore they're going to be abusive to a partner or to a spouse. It is learned, and it can be unlearned, but it takes a lot of work to unlearn.
Yeah. And I think that's really the key. It's not necessarily coming out of love, but people kind of conflate it, mix it up, that this is love.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially if that's what they've experienced growing up. They saw this with their family they were raised by, they saw it with their grandparents, that it doesn't mean they want that type of relationship, but it's just, that's what a relationship is, and that's what they've seen. And that's a very powerful thing for all of us. We kind of learn what we live, and when you've seen that just becomes what is the norm.
Yeah. And I have a friend who grew up in a dysfunctional family, an abusive family, and it's just so wonderful to see that she stepped out of that and not continued on that pattern where it could have so easily gone that direction.
Absolutely.
Where she got in an abusive relationship and passed that on to her kids and her grandkids as normal, whatever normal is. So one of the biggest questions outsiders have when looking at people who are victims of abuse is, why do they stay?
That is a big question. And I think because for someone who maybe has never been in that, thankfully, it's the idea that would never happen to me, because if anybody was calling me names or, was physically assaulting me, then I would just leave. But there are so many obstacles to leaving. I used to carry around with me for speaking engagements and such a list that was put together by a support group of all of the reasons that they could think of in this group of what made it difficult for them to leave, for others to leave. And there were 51 on that list. And that, of course, we know isn't even a complete list. But I think some of the more common reasons that we hear, one being fear, because the reality is leaving a relationship that is abusive doesn't terminate that abuse. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. At the time someone leaves a relationship and the time after that is the most dangerous time, because that control that we talked about earlier, when the abusive partner feels like they've lost that control, that's when you'll oftentimes see that abuse bumped up to an additional level to kind of regain that control. So the fear is very real. The danger is very real. Financial, if someone depends on their abusive partner for paying their rent, for being able to purchase food for themselves, their children, that can make it very difficult to leave. We all know that, housing and such is difficult, it's expensive, there are waiting lists for the quote-unquote affordable housing, not knowing where to go. If someone has been isolated for a long period of time, which is very common in abusive relationships, they may not know. They may not feel they have any family left because they've sort of been cut off from friends and from family. The idea that I don't want to tell anybody this is going on in my relationship. I don't want to leave and then have to kind of disclose to others that this has been happening. So that's very difficult.
It's kind of like a shame type of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because nobody walks into a relationship thinking, it's going to be abusive. So that embarrassment that comes along with that, the shame, thinking maybe my family won't even believe me, because the abusive partner is very rarely showing that side to others. And so, they can very easily say, well, go ahead and tell. Nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to believe you. And then if we're talking about a married couple, for example, you may have religion and culture. And that belief system that comes with religion and culture can make it very difficult to leave, because you're not only leaving that partner, you're also leaving, maybe a whole family or a whole culture. And you're going to be shunned and such with that. So that often weighs when we're talking about those certain cultures where there's already that inherent inequality between males and females.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more about shame, we've done a podcast on shame too that you can check out. So people often think that their love can change the abuser for the better. If I just love him or her enough, then they'll change. Is that true?
Unfortunately, no. I think, fiction and fairy tales and happily ever after kind of supports or perpetuates that kind of idea that, my love can change this person.
Disney has ruined this all.
Right.
Yes.
So, and I think that is, we want to believe that because, love is the most powerful emotion there is. So thinking that, I know this person doesn't want to be like this, and if I just love them enough, then they'll change. But as with anything, change has to come when the person recognizes that need to change and takes responsibility for those behaviors. And unfortunately, that's rare in someone who is controlling, who is abusive, to take that responsibility, and then after taking that responsibility, really putting in the effort to make that change and sticking with that. But loving someone is never going to change their behaviors. They're the only ones that can change their behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because we do get sucked into that.
Yeah, the whole idea of love can fix anything. They can fix a lot of things, but not somebody else's behaviors.
Right. That's a really good way to put it. And people often say, I should have seen the red flags. when they're getting out of a bad relationship. And so what are those red flags? What are the warning signs that should tell us, hey, we're getting in a relationship with an abuser?
The whole hindsight thing, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think a part of that with the red flags and the warning signs is when you're just starting into a relationship, it is wanting to see the best and just thinking, this is it, I found the one, kind of thing. But there definitely are early warning signs to a relationship that's going to become abusive. And many of the early warning signs in and of themselves are forms of control or abuse or manipulation. For example, jealousy. We know that jealousy is not the same thing as love, but oftentimes love issues that is an excuse for jealous type behaviors, if that makes sense. I love you so much, that's why I get angry when you don't come straight home from work, or when I see you talking with your ex in the library, or just any of the other examples of I love you so much, that's why I had to do this kind of thing, or that's why I feel this way kind of thing. And jealousy is very much about seeing that partner as a possession as opposed to an equal in the relationship. So if you're experiencing those jealous kind of behaviors, that absolutely is a red flag. The isolation that we talked about earlier, if you are with a partner who's wanting you all to themselves, that can feel very romantic. But if they're kind of structuring your life so that you're not allowed to, or you're unable to see friends, to see family, to participate in activities that you enjoy and that you were very involved in, and they're isolating you and really narrowing that field of influence, that is certainly a red flag also. Somebody who's also constantly blaming others for everything, not taking responsibility for any of their behaviors. And one thing that might seem somewhat unusual is, very quick I love yous and commitments in a relationship. That very quick involvement and intensity can also be an early warning sign. They're trying to, again, kind of suck you into that committed relationship so you'll feel less likely to maybe see it clearly, and be less likely to maybe step away from that when you start to see some of the other signs. But basically what it boils down to is, go with your gut. And if something feels off, there is a reason for that. Right. And take a close look at what that reason might be.
Yeah. I know when I was in college, I had someone who was abusive towards me, mentally and emotionally. And you just talked about all the warning signs that I wish I would have seen. But, I think it's important to remember that being in an emotionally or physically abusive relationship doesn't reflect back on you.
Right.
That didn't make me less intelligent or less capable or less motivated.
Right.
It just sucked the life out of me personally.
Absolutely. And I think another thing to keep in mind with that too is I've used the word manipulation a few times. And, abusive individuals are very good at kind of masking those warning signs, and making it seem okay, making it seem, again, like spinning it. So it's about my love for you. It's not about my need to control you. And so, it is difficult to see.
Yeah, I got a lot of, but I can't do this on my own without you.
And then there's that desire to, I want to help this person because I love this person.
Yes, I'm a helper.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be rough to try and navigate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. With the ongoing news coverage of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, we definitely started to see a lot more people talking about domestic or partner violence, that men can be abused also. So why do you think men are less likely to report being abused?
Well, I will certainly first say that absolutely men can be abused. And even though when we're looking at statistics, just because those numbers might lean towards the vast majority of those victims being female does not mean that men are not victims, because they absolutely are. And the impact on men that need for support and for assistance is the same regardless of gender. And while everyone has difficulty in acknowledging that this abuse is happening and reaching out for help. Again, regardless of gender, I think men encounter still that very damaging stereotype that this doesn't happen to men, and if it does, it's no big deal. You can deal with it. You're a man, kind of thing, and just the whole stereotype that men are tough and no female is going to be able to really truly physically harm a man, and that words don't hurt men, and just all of those things that really have created this horrible position for male victims to be in, and being afraid to step forward and acknowledge this is happening and seek assistance because they're afraid it's going to be some kind of reflection on their masculinity, or what is the rest of the world going to think about me if I say this is happening in my relationship. But it absolutely happens, and I hope this does help more men to recognize abuse that might be happening in their relationships and be able to say, this isn't okay, regardless of whether I'm male or not, and reach out for help. Talk to someone about it. Know that that's okay.
And in our world, with the distinct gender roles of what is male, what is female, it is a lot harder for men to talk about this stuff. I totally agree.
Absolutely.
So I've heard about the honeymoon phase and different stages in the abuse cycle. Can you tell us about the patterns that are present in abusive relationships?
Sure. I think that's a very key thing also, is just recognizing that an abusive relationship is not 24/7 physical assaults and yelling and screaming and name calling. There is an ebb and flow to the behavior in, I would say, almost all abusive relationships. And so, they're depending on, which drawing you're looking at, because there are many that kind of outline the cycle of violence, but generally there is a phase where sort of the tension begins to build, things begin to escalate. And so in a relationship where there's physical abuse going on, this might be the stage where it's just a lot of yelling and screaming and, pushing and shoving, and again, things will escalate, that tension will build to a point of sort of an explosion. And that's just a generic term for whatever the most severe kind of abuse, whatever that is that's happening in the relationship at that time, this is where it's going to happen. And so this might be physical assault that results in a trip to the emergency department, or something, similar to that, again, depending on the relationship. After that, we sort of have a de-escalation of it, and then that honeymoon phase that you mentioned. The thing with the honeymoon phase that I will point out is, in my mind, it's just as much about control as any of the other phases of abuse, because it's not about sincerity, it's not about change, it's about sucking that person back in. So the honeymoon phase might include apologies, promises that it will never happen again, promises that they'll get help. For some, I've had survivors over the years say, what promise? What apology? I've never heard an apology in my life. So for some, it is just a brief reprieve from the abuse. But regardless, it's sort of allowing for things to cool off, to think, okay, maybe things will be okay. So that's why I mentioned that it is just as controlling and just as manipulative as the other forms of abuse, because it is, again, about that control. And because it is sort of a pattern, it is a cycle, however you want to look at that, eventually that tension will begin again, and things will continue. And so that's, I think, important to keep in mind too. If you have a friend or a family member who is in an abusive relationship, recognizing that you might see them one weekend, and the partner that's being abused is very upset, very distraught, not talkative. 2 weeks later, everything's great, you go on vacation, and knowing, again, that that's not a reflection of the victim. And like you had mentioned earlier, it's, again, that power and control that abusive partner has, and kind of keeping things just kind of off kilter enough in that relationship.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So you mentioned like family members and friends seeing this cycle from the outside. So what could I do to help someone who's being abused in the world?
Well,
A friend, a family
yeah.
member.
Yeah. If you have someone that confides in you that they're being abused, take that as that this person has a lot of trust in you. Because if they're reaching out and they're admitting this to you, then they trust you with that information. And so I would say, therefore, it is incredibly important that you respect that information and respect them in their ability to make decisions for themselves. I know oftentimes with friends and family, you want to just kind of swoop them up and take them to a safe location. You might be feeling like you need to include your very honest thoughts on their abusive partner, and that is not going to help the situation, because again, with the pattern that we just talked about, we know that might not be the immediate time, if ever, that they're ready to leave. So knowing that they've shared this with you when things are quote unquote better place might then be embarrassing to them. And they might be less likely to share if they've heard a lot of horrible things about their partner, or if the person that they tell has tried to make all of the decisions for them to kind of get them out of that situation when they're not ready. Letting them know the resources that are out there, and again, letting them make that choice, leaving that door open for them to share with you again. Kind of the opposite of that is if you have a friend, a family member who hasn't disclosed that this has happened, but you're concerned that something's not okay, that it's not a safe relationship, talk to them about it, express your concern, but do it privately. And again, just letting them know that you're there. They might not even be ready to acknowledge it at that point, but if you keep that line of communication open and there's no pressure, letting them know what help is out there, help that they can seek anonymously if they want. I have honestly, truly seen that make a big difference in someone then seeking help to leave an abusive relationship, that they knew they had someone they could go to when they were ready. If it's 2 years later, if they have that person that has supported them but not kind of taken control of the situation, that makes a big difference for help in the future when they're ready for that.
It sounds like doing the exact opposite of what the abuser is doing.
It is, you're right.
So empowering them and giving them back their own individual ability to choose, as opposed to manipulating them and holding them emotionally hostage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if you might have their best intention at heart to keep them safe or whatever the case may be, ultimately, they know what is best for them at that moment. We talked about the danger when they leave, so they again are the expert on their relationship, on their partner. So no family member, no professional in this field is an expert on that person. They are, because it's their relationship and they're the ones that are kind of navigating that.
And I think that was the exact right thing that my family did when I was in this. They could recognize that it wasn't a healthy relationship, and they told me, hey, we don't really care for what he's doing to you, but we're here and we're not going anywhere, and we love you and we want you to be happy. And that was just so reassuring that I didn't have to defend him, which is very much, how to describe it, like you want to yell at him, but you also want to defend him too.
Because this is the person you've chosen to be.
Yes.
So it's kind of instinct just to defend. Even though you might agree with him 100%, you defend that person.
Very inauthentic, because I really I agree with what you're saying, but I'm still going to defend it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So that made a huge difference in my relationship with my family and my ability to say, I've had enough. I can leave this relationship and be happy on my own.
Right. It didn't give you any ultimatums that you had to choose between family and partner, because I've seen families kind of make that ultimatum and it never ends the way they think it will. And it just really puts up another barrier for that loved one in the future.
Absolutely. So what are the resources available to people in the community who are struggling with an abusive relationship?
Well, I'll tell you first about the resources with Family Crisis Resource Center, but there are other, depending what the person is looking for, the resources in the community. Family Crisis Resource Center, we are a nonprofit. We do have a 24-hour helpline, and I'll make sure to provide that information. And when we had the whole lockdown and everything with COVID, we recognized that not everyone was going to be able to safely reach out by phone. So we did initiate a text chat and an online chat. So we do have that option. And all of that is completely anonymous. We don't have caller ID. We don't ever know somebody's name or phone number when it's coming into our office or our hotline. We, of course, have counseling. We have advocacy and accompaniment. A lot of that is with the legal side of things, and I'll talk about that in a second. We have, a shelter, obviously, for someone who is fleeing and needs that safe place to stay. We do have a shelter. It is staffed 24/7, so there's always somebody there. Folks aren't left alone. And we do shelter anyone, regardless of gender, in our shelter. We also have supervised visitation because we recognize that it's not always safe for one parent to have contact with their children or with the other parents with child visitation. So we do have that option. And we also have what's called an abuse intervention program. And that is a program for individuals who are abusive to a partner or spouse. The majority of those individuals are with that program through court order, and that is the only program for which there is a fee. Everything else, victim services wise, is completely free of charge. We don't deal with co-pays or anything like that. But the accompaniment I mentioned for court, there are, of course, civil and criminal remedies that are available. There are peace and protective orders. That's what they're called in the state of Maryland. Oftentimes referred to as restraining orders, like on television, for example. But depending on the nature of the relationship, a person in a dating relationship or cohabitating married would qualify for one of those types of relief. That is an order signed by a judge that says you're not allowed to contact this person, obviously not allowed to abuse this person. And that is a great tool for some survivors. For others, if I hear in talking with a survivor, I couldn't do that because if my partner found out I told a judge what was going on, it would make things worse. Then absolutely, that's not the tool for them. Of course, there are criminal charges.
You don't try and talk them into it.
Absolutely not.
Let them make their own decisions.
Absolutely, they know that person better than I do. So if they think it's going to make matters worse, it's going to bump up that person's level of anger, then that is not the tool for them, and we look elsewhere for safety planning. So that's pretty much the community. I know there are other options up here at the university too for students.
Yeah, absolutely. With our students up here, there's Residence Life is in place to help with that issue. We also have the counseling services, CAPS on campus. And we have, of course, campus police, and the SAFE office is also available. We are willing to listen to anybody who wants to come in and have somebody to talk to, an ear to listen. So are there any other thoughts you would like to add about partner violence?
I think just simply to say that no one deserves to be abused, controlled, manipulated in any way that we've talked about in the relationship. A relationship should be about two people who equally want the best for one another, who support one another, and this probably sounds cliche, but the good times and the bad. And there's not that sense of fear of making decisions for oneself, or what the partner is going to think, or what the partner is going to do. I guess I should say, no one deserves that, regardless of what they might be hearing from the person they're in a relationship with. No one deserves that. And also, there is help out there. They are not alone in that. There are resources here on campus. There are resources in the community, and just reaching out can be terrifying, but it can make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. So we want to thank you today for your time and coming to talk to us. It was very enlightening and very empowering. We really appreciate it. And if you want more information, please check out our resources listed on this page, and also consider checking out our other podcasts too. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of our PAWSCAST. This health and wellness podcast is brought to you by the Prevention Center and Peer Education Network at Frostburg State University. If you would like more information about our programs, visit us in Pullen Hall 109 or call us at 301-687-4761. Or you could also send us an email at safeoffice@frostburg.edu.